There are growing fears of a major global trade war tonight.
President Trump signed sweeping tariffs.
25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico. He also set tariffs of 10% on Chinese goods.
Together, all three countries account for about $1.6 trillion worth of business with the U.S. each year.
Well, the Prime Minister last night announced a tit-for-tat tariff.
President Xi Jinping slammed the U.S. with several of its own tariffs.
With new tariffs and talk of trade wars dominating financial headlines, it's clear these economic tools are more relevant than ever. They can reshape industries, shift global supply chains, and directly impact our day-to-day lives. In this video, we'll dive deeper into what tariffs really are, why governments use them, and how they can either protect or disrupt economies.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
Put simply, a tariff is a tax placed on goods when they're imported or sometimes exported, calculated either as a percentage of the item's value or as a specific amount per unit. Imagine Company A in the United States wants to import avocados from Mexico. When those avocados arrive at its border, the United States government charges a fee, a tariff on each avocado, which in the end raises its overall price. Let's say the company imports avocados at $1 each, and there is a 25-cent tariff per avocado. Now the importer's cost is $1.25 per unit. The importer company pays this 25 cents extra cost, and it directly goes to the Treasury of the United States. However, depending on the type of imported goods and market dynamics, the actual burden of this additional 25 cents might be on different parties. For example, for imported goods where there are competitive substitutes in the United States, the importers may not be able to increase their prices to consumers and need to either accept lower profit margins, find another exporter, or stop importing altogether. For other items where there are no competitive alternatives or items with low price elasticities, importers may be able to pass on the additional cost to consumers, contributing to lower consumption and/or price inflation in the domestic market. But how does a company decide whether to absorb the cost of tariffs, pass it on to its customers, or move production somewhere else? What goes into making that choice?
Very, very few companies can actually absorb the cost of a tariff by themselves. First of all, the products and goods that are subject to these tariffs are often commodities for which the producers operate with very, very low profit margins. So most companies that I worked with doesn't have the kind of profit margins to absorb the costs. The only way possible for these companies to bear the cost of the tariffs and not reflected to their prices would be government subsidies. And this actually happens. China is actually a prime example of that, where many industries are often subsidized, and these companies may be able to bear the cost and not reflected on their prices. But again, in my opinion, this would be not a very common occurrence.
So why do governments want to use tariffs? There are various economic and political reasons which can be summarized in 5 main categories. The first major reason is protecting domestic industries. Tariffs make imported goods more expensive, helping local producers compete with foreign companies on price. This can protect jobs and strengthen industries which are considered vital to a nation's economy. For instance, the United States steel industry currently employs around 140,000 workers, and many argue that tariffs help keep those jobs secure.
A tariff essentially raises the price of a product in the country that imposed the tariffs. And the most often reason why governments use tariffs is to protect the domestic industries, especially industries like steel, where you can create many jobs with investments, are subjected to heavy tariffs because steel is a global commodity where you can see hundreds of millions of tons being traded between countries. And when you impose tariffs, your domestic steel producers can increase their investments, create jobs, and which is good for the economy.
The second main reason is to generate government revenue, and tariffs act as a source of income for the government. One of the earliest tariff acts date back to the 18th century when the United States federal government imposed high tariffs to fund wars. Before income and corporate taxes existed, tariffs were the primary way the government covered its expenses. Another major use of tariffs in the history of the United States was right before the Second World War. In 1930, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, the United States House of Representatives passed the
Anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects?
While the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act of 1930 raised government revenues by increasing tariffs on imported goods, it also led to retaliatory tariffs from 25 other countries, which ended up decreasing global trade by about 66% by 1934, worsening the Great Depression and contributing to the rise of nationalism around the world. After World War II, the use of tariffs started to evolve. With the establishment of multinational organizations like the United Nations, there was an effort to regulate and limit the use of tariffs, especially by developed countries. The share of tariffs as a source of income for the United States government has fallen to about 2% in modern times. The third reason is leveraging trade negotiations. Governments may impose tariffs or threaten to do so when negotiating trade deals. In some cases, this can pressure trading partners to lower their own barriers, creating more favorable conditions for the tariff-imposing countries' industries. For example, between 2018 and 2019, the United States placed tariffs on about $300 billion worth of Chinese goods, aiming to address trade imbalances and IP issues. The fourth reason is supporting key strategic industries. In addition to national security, governments sometimes identify infant or growing industries that might benefit from protection against foreign competitors until they gain enough scale or expertise. South Korea, for example, used such protective measures in the 1970s to nurture its emerging manufacturers like LG and Kia, now global powerhouses in electronics and automobiles. The final reason was safeguarding national security. Certain industries are deemed critical to a nation's security, such as defense, energy, and technology. Tariffs on strategic imports can help protect or nurture local capabilities, ensuring a reliable supply chain that are locally controlled during emergencies. Tariffs can be a double-edged sword. While they may protect domestic industries and generate government revenue, they also come with drawbacks. Let's talk about those key disadvantages of tariffs. The first disadvantage is higher prices for consumers. When tariffs are applied, importers often pass along the added costs to retailers and ultimately to consumers. This leads to higher prices for foreign goods and sometimes even for domestic products if local producers raise prices in response to reduced competition. For example, according to one study published at the Journal of Economic Perspectives, nearly all the tariff costs on Chinese goods that were imposed in 2018 and 2019 were passed on to the United States importers and consumers in the form of higher prices. Another reason is reduced competition. When tariffs make foreign goods unreasonably expensive or otherwise keep them out of a country, domestic producers face fewer competitors. This can reduce their incentive to innovate or lower prices, ultimately limiting product quality and variety for consumers. For example, prior to India's economic liberalization by the early 1990s, the Indian government imposed high tariffs on imported cars and auto components. This effectively insulated local automakers like Hindustan Motors, famous for its ambassador model, from foreign competition. As a result, with fewer rivals, domestic firms had little motivation to upgrade designs or production techniques. The ambassador's basic design changed very little for decades and often lagged behind global trends in safety, efficiency, and comfort. After India lowered tariffs and invited foreign automakers like Suzuki, Hyundai, and Honda to establish local production, the increased competition drove domestic firms to modernize, and consumers benefited from a broader selection of vehicles, more competitive pricing, and higher quality offerings. The third drawback is retaliation and trade wars. Tariffs can trigger retaliatory measures, and other countries might respond to new tariffs by imposing their own. This escalation can lead to a trade war where everyone imposes higher barriers. Trade wars often reduce overall international trade and can harm global economic growth. For example, in response to the 2018 United States tariffs, China imposed its own tariffs on United States goods, particularly targeting agricultural products, automobiles, and other key exports. By mid-2019, China had imposed tariffs on $110 billion of United States goods, while exports to China dropped from $130 billion in 2017 to around $106 billion in 2019. This particularly impacted American soybean producers, as United States soybean exports to China dropped by about 75%, from $12 billion in 2017 to $3 billion in 2018. So if tariffs can lead to retaliation, can they effectively be used as a bargaining tool in trade talks? What factors make them succeed or fail?
Tariffs can be a very effective bargaining tool if your economy is big and if you're importing a lot of goods. Obviously, this holds true for the United States. It's one of the world's largest economies. imports billions of dollars of products, and every key exporting country would be concerned to lose access to the US market. And we've been seeing from the Trump administration very frequent use of tariffs as a political tool. But this can also backfire because it would actually promote alliances by United States competitors to decrease their reliance on the US market, especially after the sanctions brought forward by Russia. Adversaries of United States and Europe have begun seriously developing an alternative currency in which trade can be conducted, and it promotes it speeds up the discussion between other countries in terms of free trade agreements and alliances and investment pacts to decrease their reliance on the US market. So while the governments are using tariffs as a tool, they should also be considerate of the fact that eventually it can force the countries to develop alternative markets, which would decrease the importance of US market.
Mohammed El-Erian, president of Queen's College at Cambridge University and globally recognized economist, also likes to apply game theory to illustrate the potential impacts of a trade policy. The weaponization of trade promises immediate gains to the United States, but if sustained over time, it risks eroding America's central position in the global economy while encouraging other countries to look for alternative systems that bypass it. The final major drawback of tariffs is the potential global economic slowdown. Widespread tariffs can disrupt supply chains, making goods and raw materials more expensive. These disruptions can slow down international trade and dampen global economic growth. If tariffs significantly reduce other nations' ability to sell to one country, those nations may have less foreign currency or capital to buy exports from the tariff-imposing country. This reduced demand can end up eventually hurting exporters at home and economic slowdown in the domestic market. Tariffs may seem just like another tax, but their impact on prices, industries, and economies can be significant. From protecting local businesses to shaping global trade, they're tools that can have long-lasting effects. Whether you see tariffs as protection for domestic industries or barriers to free trade, one thing is clear: their ripple effects across borders are impossible to ignore.